By noon on April 19th, 1775, Concord is a cauldron of rebellion, and the British position is crumbling. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith's 700 redcoats, battered by their defeat at the North Bridge and worn down from a fruitless search for colonial arms, face a grim reality. Their mission has failed, and it's time to begin their 16-mile retreat to Boston, a journey that will become a descent into hell. The countryside, awakened by the massacre at Lexington and the triumph at the North Bridge, is a hornet's nest of vengeance waiting to break loose. Between 2,000 and 4,000 militiamen, farmers, craftsmen, and townsfolk pour in from across the countryside, lining Battle Road with muskets primed and eyes burning with resolve. This is no professional army, but a people's force, forged by the powder alarms of 1774, when General Thomas Gage's raids taught them to prepare for war. Now, it's important to remember, in both Lexington and at the North Bridge in Concord, the colonials had only fired in self-defense. They had not fired a single shot in offense, unlike the English. We discussed how no one knows for sure who fired the first shot on the Lexington Green, but we also examined the deadly results of the colonial marksmanship at the North Bridge. And I think we can guess that whoever fired the first shot, it likely was not the Lexington militia. Now, the militia's strength lies in its roots, trenched in individual liberty. Unlike British troops, led by Crown-appointed officers, these men elected their leaders, neighbors that they trust to guide them through fire. Colonel William Heath, a 38-year-old Roxbury farmer and militia commander, is one such leader, chosen for his strategic mind and experience in the French and Indian War. Since dawn, Heath has ridden across the countryside, rallying communities and coordinating their movements. His presence will transform the militia from the scattered bands into a relentless machine, each man fueled by the memory of Lexington's 8 dead and Concord's defiance. It's 12:30 p.m. The Redcoat troops have barely gotten any sleep since the entire day before, and have had little to eat or drink since being on the march. They started crossing the Charles River around 11 p.m. the evening before. They are thirsty. They are hungry, they are exhausted, and their day is about to get worse. Roughly a mile down the road on the way towards Lexington, the Redcoats came to a stream with only a single bridge across. The road also made a sharp turn to the right at that same spot. Now, the way that military columns move is that they put out skirmishers and flankers to protect the column from being harassed. The road's sharp turn forced the flankers to blend in once more back into the column in order to cross the bridge. The column is being escorted, more or less, by colonial militia who are shadowing it from behind on the road at a distance. Now, no shots are being fired or hostilities exchanged. The colonials are there to ensure the peace, as well as to serve as a vigilant reminder that they will not suffer any more violence. Then, the Redcoats made a grave error, one of many from that day that would echo down the halls and corridors of history. As the regulars' rear guard crossed the bridge, they suddenly and without provocation turned and fired a volley at some Americans who had been following them. Now, unknown to the British, there were 2 American militia companies concealed in the woods on the north side of the road. And when they saw the Redcoats open fire on their fellow Americans, they in turn opened fire with devastating effect on the King's troops. Some 150 Concord militiamen pour fire into the Redcoats from a hillside, their firearms cracking like thunder. Bullets tear through the Redcoat lines, felling a dozen men in seconds, their bodies crumpling into the dust. Blood pools on the bridge, staining the planks as the British scramble to reform, their officers shouting over the screams. The militia melts back, only to strike again a half-mile later, where Sudbury men fire from the copse of oaks, dropping another handful of soldiers. The Redcoats, trained for European battlefields, are unprepared for this shadow war. Their scarlet coats easy targets against the green April landscape. Now, it's important to remember that the 2 companies that opened fire were not fired on. They were not in any direct risk. There was no need for them to open fire in order to defend themselves, like at the Lexington Green or at the North Bridge, when that British rear guard decided to turn around as they crossed the bridge and release a volley. But because their fellow Americans were in danger, there was no hesitation to make the choice, to step forward as candidates for the hangman's noose, which is exactly what would await them for firing on the king's troops. Now you'll notice another thing too. I used a word, a name, for the first time. Americans. That's because it is here that the colonials became Americans. It was here that the Americans did not wait until they themselves were directly fired upon before they used force. Here they used force to protect their friends, their family, and their countrymen from the British troops. Merriam's corner was the third strike of the match, the one from which the flame of the Revolutionary War would become ignited. From then on, the fighting, all the way back to Boston, was merciless and unrelenting. From here, the battle would transform into a war. The British column came under a continuous barrage of heavy fire, the likes of which the regulars had never experienced before. Folks, thank you for joining me on Strike 3 of the match. If you missed Strike 1 and 2, don't worry. We will link them down in both the description box as well as in the pinned comment down below. Be sure to hit like and to subscribe to the channel. Share this video around if you believe in this message of liberty. Remember, the Liberty Bell only rings if we ring it. That's the key. And doing something so simple as that can help it, whether it's sharing it on social media or hitting that like and dropping a comment down below, which will help ring it through the YouTube algorithm. They both help out. As always, look forward to reading and participating in the discussion in the comment field below. And with that, back to the video. It's 1:45 p.m. and the British by now are in full retreat, still on the road towards Lexington. Further along in Lexington, Captain John Parker, remember him, the 45-year-old farmer? He is still seething from the morning's massacre. Captain Parker has been using his time productively to orchestrate a deadly reprisal that would become known in history as Parker's Revenge. Parker, who watched 8 of his men butchered on the Lexington Green, gathers his 50 survivors as well as fresh recruits on the rocky hillside overlooking Battle Road. His words from dawn, if you recall, quote, "If they mean to have a war, let it begin here," echo to his heart as he positions his men behind boulders and trees. Around 2 p.m., as Smith's column staggers into view, Parker gives the order. A volley erupts from his troops. The British front ranks collapse, officers and privates alike torn apart by lead. Lieutenant Colonel Smith is wounded in his leg and nearly falls from his horse, his blood soaking the saddle. 15 redcoats die instantly, their bodies sprawled across the road, while 20 more clutch wounds, screaming for surgeons who cannot reach them. Parker's men reload, firing again and again before slipping away. Their vengeance exacted, but their grief still unquenched. The ambush, a testament to Lexington's resolve and Parker's organization, sends a clear message. The Americans will not forgive. The retreat grows still more chaotic. With each passing mile towards Boston, the violence continues unabated. At Bloody Angle, a sharp bend near Lincoln, the militia's fire reaches its apex. Hundreds of Americans attack from 3 sides, north, south, and west, using stone walls and thickets as cover. Multiple militia companies from multiple surrounding towns, some led by veterans of the French and Indian War, pour volley after volley into the English column, their muskets cutting down 30 men in minutes. The road becomes a charnel house, bodies piled 2 deep, limbs scattered, faces frozen in agony. The mass graves of English soldiers along Battle Road today remain a testament to the marksmanship of the simple townspeople and the militia on April 19, 1775. British soldiers, their uniforms tattered, fire blindly, their muskets useless against distant snipers. Officers targeted by marksmen fall one by one. A captain shot through the throat, a lieutenant's skull shattered. The militia's precision, honed since the powder alarms, turns the angle into a death trap. The ground slick with blood and littered with abandoned gear. As the column draws nearer and nearer to Lexington, they climb the sloped sides of the bluff near Fisk Hill. From there, they saw the countryside was crawling with thousands of colonial militia, all descending on their position. What effect did this have on the British men? Well, here's a little bit of insight from a surviving redcoat officer who wrote an account of the experience that he had from that day in that moment. He relates that as his column approached Lexington, they were under such heavy fire that the men began to break and run. He and fellow officers quickly ran to the front of the column, seized muskets, and turned and leveled them at their fleeing troops and told them, "You will form up now or we will shoot you ourselves." He then stated, reluctantly, under heavy fire, the men formed back up. Now imagine, again, these were townspeople and militia, how effective their marksmanship and their tactics must have been to turn one of the world's finest armies into this, where their own officers are threatening to shoot their troops if they do not stop running. Now, at Lexington, two important things happen. The first key moment is the arrival of the British reinforcements, General Percy's 1st Brigade. Hearing the distant gunfire, Percy positions his brigade of approximately 1,000 troops in battle formation on the hill overlooking Lexington. This brings up the English numbers, pushing over 1,500. Remember, the initial column under Smith left with 700 from Boston earlier that morning, and they've now been reinforced after suffering casualties with another 1,000. Their first glimpse of the retreating column is a startling one. Redcoats bursting out of the woods, running. Discipline once again has collapsed. Opening ranks to absorb the fleeing soldiers, the formidable 1st Brigade almost certainly prevents the near total destruction of Colonel Smith's Redcoat column. After giving Smith's exhausted troops a brief rest, Percy reorganizes and prepares for the grueling over 10-mile return trek to Boston. Meanwhile, however, on the American side, a development of equal weight unfolds. General William Heath, a self-proclaimed portly, balding, 40-ish farmer, enters the scene, and the tide begins to shift. Strangely enough, this New England farmer has a passion for military strategy, and even more remarkably, has devised a plan for keeping a moving column under constant fire. He uses couriers and dispatches them to intercept the incoming militia companies en route to Concord and begins diverting them, not to Concord, but to positions further ahead on the British line of march. Heath named this tactic a moving circle of fire because it would ensure that as the regulars continued their march back to Boston, they were continuously greeted by freshly provisioned, fresh American militia who were ready to make sure that their voices were also heard in the battle. Percy, remarkably, in his later report, echoed that phrase exactly when describing the Americans, quote, "Regardless of the direction the column moved, we were always surrounded by a moving circle of fire," end quote. General Percy thought the greatest threat to his column was from the pursuing Americans. He was surprised, however, to learn that the hardest fighting would be to his front, as the column continually bumped these fresh American units along the road in front of him. The violence turned into close-quarter, urban, house-to-house fighting. Nowhere more savage than in Menotomy, now Arlington, a village of taverns and farmhouses along the road. Militiamen, including men from Cambridge and Medford, take positions in every available structure: homes, barns, blacksmith shops, even the Black Horse Tavern. They fire from windows and doorways, their shots splintering British ranks. The Redcoats, driven to fury by hours of ambushes after a sleepless night, retaliate with primal rage. They storm houses, bayonets gleaming, thrusting steel into anyone that they find: militiamen, civilians, suspected sympathizers. At the Cooper Tavern, two brothers, Jason and Daniel Russell, fight from their parlor, only to be run through, their blood soaking the floorboards as their mother flees to the cellar. Hannah Adams, a 30-year-old mother cradling her newborn, hides in the Menotomy home as the Redcoats burst in. They spare her life, but smash her furniture, steal her silver, and leave her trembling amid the wreckage. Across the village, at least 25 houses become battlegrounds, their walls pocked with bullet holes, their interiors strewn with broken glass and bodies. Now, amid this maelstrom rides Hezekiah Wyman, a 55-year-old Woburn farmer who some would call White Death. A French and Indian War veteran, Wyman is the marksman of chilling precision, his long rifle a harbinger of doom for the English troops. As he rides, his white hair flows behind him as he gallops parallel to the British column, only to dismount and fire from a ridge or tree line. Now, the English muskets are only effective with aiming, such as they did, to about 50 yards. The American troops upwards of 100 or maybe even 150 and pushing it 200 to 250 yards. At 300 yards, Hezekiah Wyman, White Death, drops a British officer, the man's chest exploding in a spray of red. Wyman mounts again, rides a half mile, reloads anew, and fires, felling a sergeant whose men scatter in panic. British soldiers whisper of this ghost, his shots sowing terror. Wyman's enveloping tactics, strike, fade, strike again, mirrored the militia's broader strategy, his legend growing as his hits and kills, though uncounted, served to disrupt the British command as the officers begin to become hesitant to expose themselves. Now, as the day wore on and hour turned after hour, Percy realized that if his column did not reach Boston before sunset, or more precisely, the safety of the English ships at Charleston, they may not reach it at all. So he decided to choose an alternate route for the return, one that crossed the Charleston Neck, the narrow land bridge that connected Charleston just across the harbor from Boston to the mainland. Now, Heath saw that this could happen, and he had intentionally, purposefully, deliberately dispatched messengers to Colonel Timothy Pickering, urging him to move his forces swiftly to seal off the Charleston Neck, effectively corking the bottle. But for reasons that are unclear and lost to history, Pickering was slow to act. A political moderate who still held hope for reconciliation with the crown, he lingered in a local tavern, stalling until his men threatened to march without him if he didn't get moving. Because of his hesitation, Pickering and his unit arrived in Charleston just in time to watch the last of the British troops slip safely across the neck to safety. Before April 19th, General Percy held Americans in naked contempt. He described them as militarily useless, suited only to be beasts of burden, implying that if he ever had to lead a joint British and American campaign, the Americans would be in the rear, hauling the gear and cooking the meals at best. However, after the events of April 19th, General Percy's views shifted dramatically. He wrote to a friend back in England, quote, "Whoever looks upon them as an irregular mob will find himself very much mistaken. They have men among them who know very much what they are about." By morning, when the British awoke the next day on April 20th in Boston, they found themselves encircled by a swelling force of militia from nearly every corner of New England. Think about this. From Paul Revere's ride, one if by land, two if by sea, almost 3,500 American militia actually engaged the English on April 19th, 1775. Thousands more were activated, but never reached the scene of the battle. One of the world's most elite fighting forces, handpicked professionals, had been bloodied by farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants. And it was through sheer determination, not always polished discipline, that would carry the Americans through the grueling years ahead to victory. My question for you is this. If you told your friends there's a threat to your liberty, are you able to set off the Liberty Bell that would get thousands of people ready and prepared if there was a threat for their liberty? What is so different about that generation compared to ours today? If we remember what the founding generation gave up, if we uphold the ideals and the freedoms that they fought to secure, then they live on, and their sacrifice was not wasted. But if we ignore their warnings and neglect our role in the republic that they handed us, then we are not worthy of their gift, and we will most surely lose it. Because a nation of sheep inevitably births a government of wolves. I strongly encourage you to go check out Project Appleseed. Absolutely fantastic, very low cost, borderline free marksmanship. I promise you, 99% of you think you don't need it. Probably 98% of you are wrong. It's fantastic. Bring your teenage children. Check out their website, linked below for sign up. I strongly encourage you to do it as a former Red Hat instructor there myself. Our quote of the day is about the battles of Lexington and Concord, and it comes from a modern day historian, Leslie Ford, who said, quote, "The colonists understood their obligation to defend their families, their homes, and their town. Fathers and sons, young and old, the men of Lexington were the first to pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. They hoped to prevent a war, but they would not surrender their liberties." End quote. What are you surrendering today? That's my question for you. Hope to see you on the trail at Project Appleseed, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.